Let's pray before we get started. Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you for this Sabbath day. Though it's a little bit gray outside, we thank you for giving us a day of rest. I also want to thank you for another opportunity to put me outside of my comfort zone completely. And I pray that you will be with me and help my words to come out clearly. In Jesus' name, amen. So, let me turn this on here so my slides work. Comfort. Comfort is a state of physical ease and freedom from pain or constraint. Well, comfort is one of those things everyone wants. I want comfort, you want comfort. Whether it's a nice couch or an easygoing life, it's nice. Everybody wants it. To me, comfort is going with the flow, or at least my flow. When something interrupts that flow, I kind of get upset sometimes. My trip to Africa has been quite an eye-opener when it comes to what is comfortable for me. Anything that involves me doing something I've never done scares me. I do not like doing new things. Unless it's eating food. I like eating food. Especially when I'm doing it alone. That is super uncomfortable. Well, technically God is always with us, but it doesn't always feel that way all the time. And when I was going to Africa, I felt pretty scared of what was ahead of me. And I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. So I'm just going to say Zambia is a great place. I love Zambia. But for me, there was a lot of lessons coming my way. And some of them weren't particularly the best. It didn't feel the best at the time kind of way. 2 weeks after, so I arrived in, 2 weeks after I arrived in Zambia, another guy who I had never met before moved into the house I was staying in, and I didn't know him. I was excited to make a new friend, but that meant I had to share everything in the house too. I don't like sharing all the time, unless I know you. And so I had to get over that. And it was difficult, but God was putting me through life lesson boot camp. And 2 weeks in, I was optimistic, but not convinced about the whole trip. I was working the whole time while I was there, every day, not exactly knowing what I was walking into. Some days I would be digging trenches with a pick and shovel, and some days I was, this is Zambia, by the way. This is where I was, this is Riverside, and it's a beautiful place. But this is the house I was in, and what it looked like inside. My bedroom was on the left there. It's basically just one big bedroom with a bathroom attached. Okay, so some days I was putting up power lines. Those guys do not know how to use ladders all the time. They were scaring me. I think God was keeping me on my toes to help me realize my dependence of Him. This was hard for me because I'm fairly dependent on myself most of the time. But there I had to really trust Him that with every new day and every new challenge came more experience and more knowledge. Before long, I started going on short little day trips, building churches in communities and villages. This was the first church I built, the before church and the after church. So most of the churches where I went looked like the first one, until we stuck up a new one there. Then before I knew it, we were going on long trips to every corner of Zambia to build churches. For people who were so far out, it took many days to get there sometimes. One trip we went on was in the western province of Zambia. We drove about 12 hours to get to the city called Mungu. We dropped off enough materials for roughly 6 to 9 churches, and the next day we left with a few churches in our truck, and we drove about an hour and a half to where pretty much the road ended from there, in that direction. And we would continue to drive through the sand for about 3 hours. This is pretty much what the roads look like everywhere. Sometimes there was a lot less bushes though, so made going to the bathroom hard sometimes. So we would drive through this, and then we got to a place and we built 2 churches. And then after building those 2 churches, we loaded another church into canoes and canoed down the river for about an hour. And this was quite a nice canoe trip, but kind of scary having a whole church in the boat. And then we unloaded the canoe into ox carts, and we rode the ox carts for another half an hour to the village where we were going to build the church. We arrived at the village and started unloading the church, and by 1700 hours, 5 o'clock, we were pretty much ready to go. And so we started building the church, putting up foundation stakes, building trusses. That's me building a truss. And we did that for 2 hours, so the next morning we could just throw it right up. So that's the end product of what the church turned out to be the next day. And you can kind of see the village behind it. In Mark 10:27, it says, "But Jesus looked at them and said, 'With men it is impossible, but with God, for with God all things are possible.'" Slowly I was learning that the more I stepped out of my comfort zone, the more I was learning. The first step was getting on that plane and saying, "You know what, Lord? I'm going to be gone for a while, and I don't really know what I'm getting myself into, but your job is to teach me something new, something that can make me a better person." You may have heard of the group called Yes Theory. They're on YouTube. And they're a bunch of guys who are really, it seems like they have the urge to do stuff that is outside of their comfort zone, or just outside of the ordinary. Stuff that most people wouldn't do. They were a big inspiration for me while I was in Africa, and still sometimes. Stepping out of your comfort zone is quite hard, but when you make that step and say, "Yes, I'll go do it," it really makes a big difference. These guys are not Christians, but some of their things that they do, if we applied it to our Christian life, it could all make us much better. As C.S. Lewis put it, life with God is not immunity to difficulties, but peace within difficulties. In Genesis chapter 12 and 13, it's the story of Abraham. This was a man who was told by God, hey, I need you to go somewhere. And you don't know this place, and you don't know what's there, but I want you to go. And I'm sure that wasn't comfortable. He had to leave a nice warm home. He had to leave family and friends. And he still got up and said, you know what, Lord? If you want me to do that, then it must be the right thing for me. And he had troubles on that journey. He went through quite a lot. He went to Egypt, there was famines, and he didn't get everything right. He messed some things up too, like we all do. But God was there to show him, you know what? You mess up, that's okay. I still love you. God doesn't want us to be comfortable Christians. That doesn't mean go sell your nice fluffy pillows. Those are nice. You can keep them. But what it does mean is stop being so dependent on yourself. Step out and do something for God. Discomfort can come in many forms, but if you let God do his work, good lessons can come from even the hardest situations. Of course, not all of my trip was hard work, because sometimes people need a breather. We did go out and do fun things. We got to see lions and this thing stopped working. Some elephants. And hippos, which was pretty awesome. This was the next church we went to. This, about 2 out of the 3 months I was in Zambia, I spent in villages learning the ways of life, interacting with people, and ultimately mostly building churches. This is one of the houses I stayed in. That square one there is what it looked like inside. These months were hard and tiresome sometimes, but God always has a way of pulling us through the other end. Electricity was scarce, which for me was kind of hard. I like my phone. But you know, God always has a way of showing you that some of the things you have that are convenient and nice to keep you connected with the rest of the world, you don't really need them. Back in the day, there was these missionaries, and they would go out and, well, they probably didn't even, they got letters every 3 months, maybe. But that's slow for me. And it was really uncomfortable not being able to talk to anyone from North America, from home. And so that was hard. And even on the farm back at Riverside, we had power outages, and sometimes we'd have no power for a week. And so even when you are in civilization, there's not always power. It felt like I had been cut off from friends and family, but God was like, hey, I'm still here to talk to. There's still me. So God was leading me down what felt like a long and exhausting path, a path that could lead me anywhere. But if I listened to him, it was a path that could only grow and strengthen me. Thinking is one of my problems. I worry too much about everything, constantly planning. These plans may never go anywhere, and in Zambia, they really didn't do me any good, but I still did it. But as time went on, God was telling me to stop worrying and to leave that to him. This was hard for me. That was one of those things I didn't want to share. Here's the thing. Comfort is nice. That's why we like it. But nobody will grow if they never leave their comfort zone. Growth of any kind requires strain or even pain. But if you want to grow to be more like Jesus, step out of your comfort zone and let God take control. I'm going to leave you with this verse. Oh, that verse. one before. That one. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Thank you.
Amen.